Good afternoon and welcome. I am Wendy Berger, Senior Vice President of Financial Resource Development at Jewish Federation of Delaware. We are thrilled to have over 150 people registered for this very special and timely webinar today, presented by Federation in partnership with our beneficiary agency, Jewish Family Services of Delaware. We could not be more grateful or appreciative to have four prominent community mental health professionals who have donated their time and expertise to provide information and tips for our community as we are all coping with COVID today and preparing for the new normal for tomorrow. I am honored to introduce our moderator for today's webinar, Paul Sheslow, psychiatric nurse practitioner at Jewish Family Services of Delaware and in private practice at Delaware Behavioral Health. Thank you and welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Wendy. Today we are talking about coping with COVID today and the new normal for tomorrow. We are going to have three awesome presenters today talking about the impact of the virus on people throughout the whole lifespan, on children, adolescents, and adults. I'd also like to at this time share with everybody that people that are in need of help, JFS and the Jewish Federation are here to help everybody. There is a helpline that you can call in conjunction with the Jewish Federation of Delaware. You can either go to jfsdelaware.org or JFS on call and call the phone number, which is 302-781-4537. Again, that's 302-781-4537. First up to talk, we have Dr. Dahra Williams, who has been practicing psychology for over 12 years. She was previously a professor of psychology at LaSalle University. Currently, Dr. Williams is the consulting psychologist at the Independence School and also works in private practice with children, adolescents, and their families at the Hookessin Center for Change. Dahra will be talking about the impact that COVID-19 has had on children. Thank you, Dahra.
Thank you, Paul, and it's so great to be here. I'm going to share my screen and my slides will be made available on the Federation website. I also invite anyone to ask any questions that I might have. Just go ahead and pop those into the chat box and Paul will shoot them over to us, I'm sure. Okay, so hopefully, right. As I mentioned, thanks so much for having me here today. I feel like all of us are thinking that we are in a really unusual and strange time. And, we're thinking and saying things we would have never said before. And it really is just quite an uncertain time for everyone. And what I want to focus on is how can we support young children as we go through quarantine and the whole COVID-19 pandemic. What we know is as adults, we are experiencing a wide range of emotions. Kids too are experiencing a wide range that will for time at home and over the time with our families. Young children are limited in terms of how they express their feelings, and that's really dependent on age, their verbal abilities, their social and emotional functioning, their social maturity, and certainly family patterns, trends, and unspoken rules in a home. Things that they not behave the case. One thing for sure is that we are all affected, and definitely agree on that. All of us agree with lots of something, whether it's birthday parties or soccer practice or even year-end recital, even the feeling of normalcy. Everything is just unusual at this point. And by 10 weeks, we're all probably a little bit or a lot tired. So how are kids impacted by COVID? Well, we know that there's a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty is extremely hard to tolerate. When uncertainty grows anxiety. We know that anxiety, depression, worker that's in clinical practice and in the literature. We also know that in children, it looks different than it looks like in adults. So what we can really focus on is trying to give kids as much predictability in the face of so many unknowns. So you it might look like displaced frustration, it might look like tiredness, a child might be anxious, but it might seem like irritability and happiness. They're having small things, maybe having trouble sleeping, started on tasks, they might be often looking for reassurance, not wanting to separate from their parents. And that's because so much is very different at this point. Kids are at home with their parents, but their parents are unavailable to them. And so that might be hard for them to manage. So how can we help? You know, what we really want to focus on is minimizing our own anxiety and celebrating the victories. So perhaps we could allow ourselves some time and some patience to settle into this new normal. It's still extremely new for everyone. There's no playbook. We've never lived through this global pandemic before. And so we really want to be patient as we find our stride during this time. Perhaps we can even work on maintaining some kind of schedule. We know that at school, first thing in the morning, teachers, they get together, they have the kids together, they review the schedule for the day, they know what time is snack, what time is their circle time, things like that. Try and create some kind of predictable schedule at home as well. And meanwhile, looking for all the wins, the small wins. It is extremely unreasonable to expect perfection at this time at home, at school, or even at work. And what we do know is that every day can be better than the previous day. And if it's not, we know that tomorrow we have another try again. So here are some suggestions. Of course, one size is not going to fit all, but what we really want to do is acknowledge and validate young children's feelings. All feelings are okay, and every feeling communicates something to us about how a child might be processing these uncertain times. If we can, we should try to anticipate these difficult times. Sometimes the day might be harder to manage than others. You might notice that you have a really busy schedule, and so maybe you want to have some screen time around those times. If you can be flexible with your work hours and divvy up things that might be helpful, or even having a no asking about school time of day. We have all this extra time. Some kids are really focusing more on their passion projects, like on their soft skills or practicing their instruments, those things, and certainly develop some great family routines. It is okay if you feel like you're running out of steam at this point. We are 3.5 months in, and trying the new normal only guarantees more uncertainty. So we could have normalized things. And there are a bunch of really great articles online that help give ideas about how to talk to kids about coronavirus, COVID-19. In general, you really want to welcome questions, validate fears, and be reassuring even in the unknown situation, trying not to be overly confident in what we don't know, meet them where they are mentally, and then absolutely just enough information to satisfy their answers. If they have questions, they'll ask more questions, but then you know you've been able to manage their needs. So for you little kids, Sesame Street has done a great job of putting a lot of good content out there specific to this time. There are town halls there was one town hall that was really great. Kids asked really important questions, including, you know, how to keep the tooth fairy safe during this unusual time, and can the tooth fairy still come, things like that. They are going to have one on May 30th, so that's coming up, where kids can ask questions of the experts as well. Elmo hosted a play date to show that you can still stay in touch with your friends even during this crisis. If you notice that your children are really anxious or having a lot of temper tantrums, some skills that help would include teaching them about diaphragmatic breathing or belly breathing or little breathing, I call it sometimes. There are apps that you can download.
Dr. Williams, I think that we are having some audio troubles. I'm so sorry to interrupt you here, but I think the bandwidth, there's something going on with that. So I have to pause us real quick and hand it over to Dr. Mandelbaum. I'm so sorry. We're just having so much trouble, but I told the audience that we're going to get them your slides and all the information.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry, Dr. Williams.
That's fine.
Yeah, from what we could hear, it was fantastic, but it kept cutting in and out. And the comments that people were saying were also very positive when they could hear you. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. Good.
We can hear you well, thank you.
Okay. All right. Sorry, everybody, about that. Her slides will be available. And we'd love to hear more from you, Dr. Williams. So up next to talk about adolescents, we have Dr. David Mandelbaum. And please continue to let us know if you're having any issues hearing anybody. Dr. David Mandelbaum has been a practicing psychologist for over 40 years. Prior to relocating to Wilmington, Delaware, he was a professor and director of the Counseling Center at Elmira College in New York. He has a private practice in Delaware where he specializes in working with adolescents and their families. So here to talk to us about adolescents and how that is being affected by COVID-19, Dr. Mandelbaum.
Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
It is a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this webinar. Mental health experts are predicting that for all age groups, a significant increase in mental health issues as a result of being exposed to, and I don't mean literally exposed, but as a result of being dealing with the COVID sequestrations and loss of jobs, and I could go on and on, but there are so many impacts of COVID on all age groups. So I think this is a really timely webinar. The good news and bad news is about adolescents, and I'm sure there are many incidents of good and bad news, is that adolescents in normal times, whatever that means, are probably more vulnerable to mental health issues than almost any population except perhaps geriatrics. But you know, they're very vulnerable for a couple of reasons. One is they're required to make significant decisions of their future, and related to that is the part of their brain that allows for logic and emotional regulation is still developing. So they don't have the same kind of capacity to weather the storms of adolescence, both physically and emotionally. The good news is most adolescents that I've worked with weather this pretty well. And there are exceptions, most do fine. COVID, I think, has an impact on this, on the challenge for adolescents in two ways. The primary developmental task, which is a fancy way of saying at every age group for children, there are certain developmental tasks that are required to master in order to move on to the next phase of childhood, psychologically. And the developmental task for adolescents is to separate from their parents, and the fancy term is individuate, which basically means developing their own identity and becoming their own person. And that can be challenging under good circumstances, as I've already indicated. One of the things that it's almost like a security blanket for little kids. Adolescents' security blanket is their peers. In other words, in spite of what adolescents think, you know, once they move into adolescence, they are not quite ready to assume adult roles and responsibilities. They think they may be, as any of you who are parents of adolescents can attest to. But the fact is they're not ready. And on some level, they know that too. So what happens is they bond with peers, and peers become extremely important, and friendships become extremely important to adolescents as they kind of move through this phase. Just as a little aside, one of the things that is risky when you're parenting an adolescence, good or bad times, is being very critical of their friends, because to them, that is taking away their lifeline in a way. So, so at a time when friends are most important, COVID is having an impact on the availability of friends. They're not getting together if they're practicing safe distance. And that can increase isolation for kids. It is increasing isolation for kids. And friends are less available, and it's really very difficult. It makes the task of separating very difficult because they don't have their security blanket and they're with you 24/7, which most of the time adolescents would do anything not to be with their parents 24/7, but they don't really have a choice right now. So that can, and if they don't have the outlet of their friends to connect, it can create some tensions in the family. And from the work I've been doing with folks via video, it is creating tensions for a lot of the kids and the families. The second impact, so the first impact is the developmental task. The second impact is all of the loss and the grief that adolescents are facing over and above the norm. And by that, I mean there's loss of friendships. There are loss of rituals. I mean, most kids are not, well, I would say all kids in Delaware, at least, are not graduating, especially if they're older. They're not going to be graduating in the same way. I had a kid that I worked with who very tearfully, she goes to a small, not a small, but a small private school. And she's been at this private school since she was 3, and she's graduating this year. And when we were talking about the the impacts of the sequestration, she said to me, maybe it even chokes me up a little bit. Maybe the hardest thing for me is that I don't get to say goodbye to my second family. And I think even in in public schools, there are cohorts that form within their senior class, and they're not getting to say goodbye. So that it makes the natural resolution of graduating and moving on to adulthood even more problematic. They're not able to say goodbye. Fundamentally, they're not able to say goodbye. And the ritual, the loss of rituals. Graduation is a marker. Going through high school is a marker. Becoming a senior is a marker, and they don't have that in the same way that they would have under different circumstances. The other thing that is difficult for adolescents anytime is choices about the future. Okay. Prior to COVID, I mean, we never know what the future is going to bring. And that's kind of an existential anxiety. But prior to COVID, at least there were some reasonable hunches we could make. With COVID, I don't know what the future is going to bring. How can adolescents know what the future is going to bring? Some of them are accepted into college, but don't know if they're even going. And that's pretty impactful on these kids when they don't know. Some of them, have this catastrophic fantasy that they're going to be sequestered for the whole year with their parents. I assure you that is probably not going to happen. I assure you parents and you adolescents that is not going to happen. So what do we do about it? I'm compressing a half-day seminar into 7 minutes. So, there are lots of things I could say that I'm not going to be able to say. But one of the things we should do, I think, is give our kids, while we're in the sequestration period, more opportunities to make decisions for themselves. And I'll just use I don't know if it's a silly example, but if the expectation now is, since you're all captured together in your house, to always have dinner together, which rarely happens when in normal circumstances. In some ways, give the kids choices about how often that's going to happen. And the second thing we can consider is, while I am a big fan of setting some limitations to social media, that's another whole seminar about what the impacts of social media can be on kids in normal times. But this is their only outlet now. Maybe not only, I'll get to other possibilities in a second, but this is a prime outlet. Excuse me, so I might loosen up a little bit about the time that the kids can spend on social media, give them opportunities to do that. Encourage your kids, and a number of the kids I'm working with are going out to exercise and even exercising with friends. I'm thinking of this one young girl who's a runner at a school, and she and friends run together exercising social distance, and they're able to talk. I've been pretty religious about maintaining social distance most of the time. But I get together with friends and we sit 6 feet apart and we order food and we enjoy that. So that's a possibility to consider and recommend. I recommend it. I guess the last thing is, because this is a high period of anxiety, be mindful and try to notice any dramatic changes in your children's mood. And you know, if your kid is kind of an introverted kid to begin with, if he or she continues to be introverted, no big deal. But if you have an extroverted kid who then moves into kind of being withdrawn, being isolated, that's just one example, it's something to note and to question them about. And it is okay to ask questions about how they're doing. It is okay to ask questions about what are they worried about. And our job is to try to listen as attentively and non-judgmentally as possible. Encourage them to problem solve. Don't solve the problems for the kids. It'll empower, I usually don't like that word, but it will empower kids to be more independent and more responsible. So that's my brief presentation, and I'm certainly open to questions afterwards. Paul? Or whomever.
Thank you, Dave. So I'd just like to apologize again for the technical issues we were having with Dr. Williams. Obviously, everybody was also very engaged with her. So we are going to try and have her have another shot after we hear from Dr. Sheslow, who I have met a few times in my life. Dr. Sheslow has been a practicing psychologist for over 40 years. He worked at the Alfred I. DuPont Hospital for Children for 35 of those years. He continues to work in private practice with children, families, and adults at the Hutchinson Center for Change. He's going to be talking to us about how this has been affecting adults, which I think Dave had kind of touched on a little bit. Dr. Mandelbaum had touched on a little bit. You know, it's hard to tell a teen what to do if adults don't even really know what to do either. So, all right, Dr. Sheslow.
Well, thank you. I practiced psychology with you for at least 30 of them. So my task today is to talk about the effects of COVID-19 from an adult perspective. There's no doubt that COVID-19 has resulted in significant psychological distress for many of us. In the brief time allotted, I wanted to highlight just some of the ways that COVID-19 and sheltering in place have resulted in psychological issues for adults. You may know, let's just talk first about grief. You may know people who have suffered and even died as a result of COVID-19, or even not going to the hospital to take care of other illnesses or other medical problems. That seems to be a real phenomenon. In these circumstances, grief would be a natural reaction. Grief is made even more significant by the social isolation that sheltering in place has resulted in. A prolonged grief reaction, perhaps beyond a year, or a reaction that results in a significant depression, marked by difficulty with eating, sleeping, enjoying, intense anxiety, loss of pleasure in things that were formerly enjoyable, requires a referral to a mental health professional. Sadness. Sadness, perhaps grief's cousin, seems to be easy to come by these days. My grandmother, our great family psychologist, used to say, a sadness shared is a sadness halved. Please make sure that you're sharing your feelings. In a discussion with a cardiologist that I knew at the DuPont Hospital, he was talking about all the great things that interventional cardiologists were doing. And I reminded him that more of us die from heartache than heart failure. And he agreed. PTSD. If you or one of your relatives have been a first responder on the side of treating COVID-19 illnesses, you may be close to those who are frankly suffering. As many as a third to a half of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals are currently suffering from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And this can be a delayed reaction. A recent study reported that in the near future, as many as 47% of medical care workers will suffer from trauma reactions enough that will require psychological assistance. Anxiety. You don't have to be a first responder to be suffering from anxiety. Approximately 5 to 10% of us had anxiety disorders before all of this. The conversation, the news, the inner thoughts that seem to be running along the brain's warning system, which is the neurological way of saying our anxiety response system, gets activated during this time of plague. Anxiety can be painful. Anxiety can be overwhelming. Anxiety can, however, also be our friend and signal the need that we have to understand and cope with dangers that we feel are being presented to us. Anxiety takes place in the future. It's the what if that something terrible might be happening. When anxiety is overwhelming, it needs to be brought into the office, or in today's world, to the screen of a mental health professional. Financial insecurity. There are, of course, real world problems that are pressing in that have psychological effects. 30 million Americans have lost their jobs or have job insecurity. While unemployment insurance and financial salaries paid by employers have had some effect, many families are still financially stressed. Financial insecurity and eventually food insecurity can unhinge any family. So, giving. We can help by giving. Giving to others is a form of prayer and a way that makes us feel that we are contributing. A note on loneliness. Many of us have been sheltering in place even before the COVID virus. Before the virus, we had a pandemic of loneliness in this country. In the United States, 35 million of us, that's about 28%, live alone. In 1969, that was only 17%. A recent study from the University of Chicago reported that more than 30% of folks above 70 are reporting feeling lonely. In 2018, in the United Kingdom, a minister of loneliness was started. They felt that there was a pandemic of loneliness in Great Britain and that they needed to have a national response to this Western pandemic. When loneliness meets isolation, depression, anxiety, physical illness, and even self-harm can result. While it is simple to say, it is hard to do these days. Reach out and touch someone. Uncertainty. Lastly, I wanted to mention uncertainty. These days have had nothing but uncertainty. Uncertainty breeds anxiety. And when we look down the road, we see more uncertainty. We are a species that really likes routine and certainty. And we certainly don't have that these days. And we're often not that good at recognizing that we are in trouble. Again, because many of us are alone and we don't even have people to bother to tell us that we're bothering them. So what are the signs? You can't stop the worries. can't concentrate, can't sleep well, get more irritable, feeling hopeless. Increase in substance abuse and use, social anxiety, and even denial that there are any problems are other signs that something is not going well. Make the call. Mental health, mental health professionals know a lot about treating anxiety and depression. We actually went to school for just that, and we're a very friendly bunch. And what about after? The after COVID might take a while. Now will eventually return into after, but not yet. We have to maintain perspective and hope. Two things are important to remember while we look into the future. We will go through the door, the dark door of COVID into the future. Think about what you want to take with you as you go through that door. More contact with the family, more awareness of racial inequity, a greater understanding of who actually is essential, a sense of what is really valuable to you. Forgetting. Humans have amnesia pretty easily. We forget because we're fatigued that we need to continue to be careful. There is reason that the vulnerable are called vulnerable. Let's continue to be careful out there. Connect. Find ways to connect because now is the time for connection. The rule of thumb, try to connect with 3 people per day. Connect with organizations like SeniorLink. My daughter has a senior buddy that she's connecting with through SeniorLink, and the two of them are developing quite a nice relationship. Quarantine Buddy is another organization that I believe that comes out of Philadelphia. Do an activity with friends online. My wife cooked online a dinner with her mom, and both of them burnt dinner simultaneously. That's not unusual in our house. You can cook, you can paint, you can eat, you can drink, or you could even just simply talk online. You don't have to feel this bad. There are many of us who really do feel this bad. Jewish Family Services, a Federation-supported mental health facility, is there to help. Open Path Collective has a sliding scale, and again, online appointments are available. There are support groups. The National Alliance for Mental Health peer support communities are available online. AA meetings are online for those with concerns about drinking too much these days, and there are many of us. For crisis counseling, there's crisis text 24/7, the crisis text line 24/7, or Lifeline, and the numbers are on the Jewish Federation website. And do good things. Exercise, walk in the woods, do an online yoga class if you're my wife, and practice gratitude. Most of us who are tuning in today have a roof over our head, have the ability to shelter in place. And for that, we have to be very grateful. Give to others. Giving to others is a great way to feel good about ourselves. And limit the news. I have seen so little good news out there that I really think it's important to try to hang out with people that make you feel good about being alive. Thanks very much. And I really hope that we'll be able to get Dr. Williams back in one form or another. I've seen her talk, and it's really wonderful. She's a terrific clinician. So questions whenever that's available.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheslow. And we really appreciate the words of hope. You know, I think that a lot of people need that right now. If you hear my dog in the background at any point in time, I am sorry. She spotted the mailman. So I just wanted to remind everybody that if you guys have questions that pop up during this, you can go ahead and write those in the chat, and we can make sure that we get to those and take note. And by popular demand, we're going to have Dahra Williams come back to the stage. I think a lot of people wanted to hear what you had to say, Dahra. So hopefully this works better. And if I could just have everybody let me know if they can hear her okay, that would be fantastic.
Thank
right.
you very much, Paul.
Got it.
I apologize. I have no idea what happened, but connectivity typically is bad where we are. None of my kids are on Zoom or anything. But if this is any lesson for all of us, it is the lesson of coronavirus and quarantine, right? Flexibility, uncertainty, crazy things happen even when you have the best time. So I'm not going to share my slides. I'm just going to talk, and Nicole and Wendy will throw these slides up on the website afterwards. So I think where I got cut off was when I was talking about Elmo and how Elmo could really help us during this really uncertain time. You know, the kinds of questions kids have, like, you know, my kindergartner wants to know if the tooth fairy can still show up because she's about to lose her first missing teeth, right? Can she still come to our house with social distancing? And so CNN does have a town hall where kids can ask the very important questions, the things that are on their mind. And they have a second one that's coming up on May 30th. There's also a little play date that Elmo shows that you can still keep in touch with friends. I don't know if you have friends like Lin-Manuel Miranda stopping by your play dates, but certainly it's a way to, you know, keep in touch and let everybody know that by staying at home, it doesn't mean that you have to be out of touch with everybody else. I think we were also talking about reducing anxiety. So if children are demonstrating that they are feeling anxious, they are feeling worried, you can teach them a few really easy strategies that I'll go through very quickly because I feel like I used up most of my time already. Diaphragmatic breathing, belly breathing, or balloon breathing, just in and out, deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. I have some YouTube links that can help you step your children through it. There's also this really fun little show called Esme and Roy. They're little monsters, and sometimes the monsters have monster meltdowns, and there's a cute little 1-minute song that talks about belly breathing, and you can help your children go through that as well. My kindergartner, her teacher sent us home a link to rainbow breathing, which I don't know if you guys can see me, but imagine just lifting your arms up and down while you're taking deep breaths as though you are creating a rainbow, right? The physical action helps to really centralize kids, and it helps them calm their minds and bodies. So those are some deep breathing strategies that you can teach children, and it will really help them. Another really good strategy that we have, psychologists like to talk about, is progressive muscle relaxation. It's good for adults, it's good for kids. On the slides, I have 3 different ways that you could do it with children: as a song, as a chart, or even as metaphors. So for example, you want to isolate different areas of your body, clench and release them repetitively, and you're kind of giving yourself a little massage. Do it with your kids, you will feel more relaxed. One thing that will do is just even the deep breathing strategies and the progressive muscle relaxation strategies, it will help them feel as though they have some control over the physiological symptoms of anxiety, which can feel overwhelming even to really young children. So one more thing I want to mention is if you find that your kids are unable to verbalize what they're saying, they might not have the language for it. You know, they might feel sad, but really it's coming out as anger. So there are books, there are videos that can help you with the vocabulary, emotion labeling, things like that, you know. And there's a link that I have in my slides for, it's actually an 11-minute video about all different kinds of emotions. So what I would like to talk about is focusing on the unanticipated positive consequences of this quarantine time. What are the benefits of being forced to be at home with our families? What have you learned about seeing your kids up close as learners? Since we're not commuting, I mean, people might still be doing their piano lessons over FaceTime and Zoom, but we're not commuting. So with all this extra time, how are you spending those extra evening hours with your family? If we try to control what we can control, we'll feel better about the situation. So another little note on screen time. I think I get this question a lot from all my families, especially families with children of all ages. You know, physical distancing is a very important public health mandate, but social distancing is a misnomer at best, and it's definitely not recommended. Dave mentioned that the pandemic of isolation that preceded this COVID thing. And so what we can really encourage kids is if they're using technology for keeping in touch, making connections, and it's high quality screen time, It's not getting in the way of their academic or non-academic tasks. It's not negatively impacting their sleep. The American Academy of Pediatrics has actually relaxed some of the guidelines about the volume of screen time that kids are consuming. We do know that this pandemic is going to end, and life as we sort of knew it is going to return in terms of, where kids will be and how much time they'll be at home. And so we know that kids understand this is an unusual time and this is not going to be the status quo moving forward. So as time develops, we will be able to manage our screens more effectively. So some final thoughts. Little kids especially can be really, really, really sensitive barometers of how we're doing as adults. And so many times we're busy taking care of other kids or even parents, other loved ones. Self-care is not selfish. We have to take care of ourselves to be able to be emotionally present for our children. If we engage in balanced thinking about this situation, we'll be better off for it. So instead of thinking, oh my gosh, we're stuck at home, we could think we are safe at home. I know we're all trying to work from home, but really we're not working from home. We're at home working during a global pandemic with all of our children around all the time. And so that's not the same kind of thing. We know kids are resilient, but we have to pay attention to what they're telling us, even if it is without words. And my last slide is a big, you got this, together we can get through this. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. Thanks for letting me finish, Paul.
Absolutely, that was fantastic. We could hear you that time. I don't know about everybody else, but I know that I've been having a lot of little monster meltdowns recently. So we did have a couple questions so far. The first one was directly to you, Dr. Williams. The question is, for a 2.5-year-old little girl acting out, it's hard to weed out what's related to COVID and what's related to having a baby sibling that's just born in mid-March. So the question really is, what is normal testing behavior from a toddler, especially in these times where, it's kind of hard to weed that out with the COVID response?
Yes, and unfortunately, well, thank you for that question. And unfortunately, there's no way really to tell, how much of it is a COVID situation, how much of it is a new baby. Certainly in many families, when there is a new baby, there's a lot of, regression, some kind of anger. I would say to really spend some time with, like when the baby is napping or, or if there's another caretaker around, to really spend some time with the 2.5-year-old. Spend that time where she is or he is directing the activity. So maybe if you guys are playing tea party, you're letting her lead so that she feels as though we kind of call it special time in our geeky psychologist world. But it's a really important way to build up that emotional bond, even if it was 100% strong previously. So with that, and you can also talk about, having this baby sister and getting her involved in the care of that little one, little things like help mommy get the diapers or help mommy do this, so that she feels that her situation is different than the baby's, but she's still valued and loved completely.
Great. Let's see here. So another question for, I think, everybody at large right now. Someone was asking if we could speak a little bit about siblings during this pandemic and tips for how to encourage harmony and getting along in the time where people are not getting the space that they probably once did. I'm not sure who could speak to that.
David? David, you're muted.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted, yes.
So the question was how to encourage siblings to get along with each other during this time of forced contact.
Right, exactly.
I guess the first thing I would say is have realistic expectations of what getting along together means. There's going to be more conflict because they're together all the time. It's really important, I think, for both, let's assume there are 2 kids or 3 kids, that each of them have their own space that they can retire to when things get tense, with the parents' encouragement and even with their siblings' encouragement. I've had kids say to their siblings, I think you may need a timeout now. And I think that's appropriate for kids to articulate that kind of thing. It's inevitable that it's going to happen. So I want to be clear about that. And certainly if it got physical, there have to be limits set to that. If it gets screaming, yelling, there probably should be limits set to that. But it's the arguments and the bickering back and forth will happen more frequently.
I might add one thing to that, Dave. Children frequently compete for limited resources, and the limited resources that they may be competing for might be the parents' attention. Parents are having multiple roles these days. They're
Right.
teachers, they're doing their own work, and they're breaking up whatever arguments, let's say, is going on in the sibling group. So each of them probably needs something from whoever is doing the caretaking at home. They each need something by themselves. They need a cohesive way of being together, and they're probably going to need some of your own time. My mother-in-law, who was a special ed teacher, taught me something important. She said, either give it to them or they're going to steal it from you. And she was talking about attention. And boy, that's a great lesson. She was right for a change.
So due to some time constraints, I just want to make sure that we get everybody's question answered. So one question.
Paul, were you allowed to run over a little bit because of the snafu originally?
Okay.
I can stick around. I think Dave can stick around.
Okay, good.
Dahra, you have patience?
No, not this afternoon. So yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So one question I'm seeing floating a lot around in the chat is this sort of dichotomy between how much video games and internet time and stuff like that, if that's the way that you can really socialize. One person asked, my daughter's 10 years old and seems to be withdrawing from socializing through the internet. And I think that's a question that a lot of people have floating around right now that I don't know if you guys could speak to as well. But, limit setting versus the response to COVID and kind of how people can weed that out.
I mean, I'll start with that, and then certainly the Davids can jump in as well. This is a tough one for every parent, right? Because before COVID, people were complaining that their kids were on devices too much anyways. And the video game developers and everybody, they've studied everything to know how to keep kids in games. This is an unusual time. I grew up in Jamaica, and in the 80s, there was a hurricane. We had no electricity for 9 weeks, and we couldn't communicate with our friends. When I was faced with this pandemic and having my kids home, I thought, geez, they're going to be so lonely. They're going to be so isolated, but not really. They could FaceTime, they could Zoom, they're touching base with their cousins much more often. They are really connecting. So allowing them the access to the screens is going to be helpful, but setting parameters of what they're doing with that access is going to be essential. So you can say, yes, this is an unusual time, and we used to give you 2 hours a day or whatever the family agreement was, and that might be upped a little bit more realistically, right? But then you might have to also piece out how much is school time, how much is game time, and how much is really good connection with their friends. If you are able to spend time with them or find a way to socially distance, but maintain, we've tried to have, the neighbor kids on their side of their fence, our kids on our side of the fence, and we're keeping 6 feet or more, but we're interacting that way. That's another way you can get them off the screen time, but still feeding that social connection that is so important at this point, because you don't want to substitute one problem and create another. And we all can really feel a little bit more comfortable knowing that eventually we're going to move them back towards where we want them to be, right? This is a temporary situation, even if it drags on for another couple of months. We know kids are resilient, and we know that even though they got to this point in a short period of time, we can get them back to where they need to be in a relatively short period of time.
What Dahra said. I would also want to add one thing, which is, again, non-COVID issues are parents struggle, as Dahra said, parents struggle with how much time to allow their kids to be on social media, the internet, and it's never enough time as far as the kids are concerned. But what I've recommended always, and now too, is first the obligations get met. So there's online schooling for virtually everybody now. Most of the feedback I get from the kids I know is that it's adequate at best, but that needs to be done before they have access to the internet and social media, like in normal times. The only thing that's different is maybe we give them a little, as Dahra pointed out, we give them a little more time on the social media once their responsibilities have been met.
So another question I'm seeing floating around a lot, which Dr. Mandelbaum or Dr. Sheslow or Dr. Williams, you may all be able to kind of speak to, is the notion of when to not only differentiate between a COVID reaction and anxiety and depression, but when to kind of seek out extra, outside help, professional help. How do people know sort of what point that's required?
Well, I'll take that. I've never met a mental health professional that doesn't think it's a great idea to seek out a mental health professional. So with that idea in mind, problems that are contained within the family that you feel that are being responded well to family meetings, to individual times with your children, that feel like you're sort of in the flow of coping. Even if it is stressful, you're in the flow of coping. Those really don't need to come outside of the family. But any of the problems that we had before, and Lord knows we had enough of these problems before, I don't see sheltering and the anxiety and the sadness that we're feeling by seeing all the news making any of those things better. So if you're feeling that there's an exacerbation of old problems that have now reached a new level, that may be a time. I've had an interesting situation where many of the youngsters who I was working with, who had school-related anxiety, performance anxiety, really don't want to come to therapy because they have no anxiety now. What one mother said to me is they're living the dream. They have their friends online, they have me all the time, and there's no anxiety in their world. And we'll see you when they go back to school. So you still have to be in a situation where the family is seeking the help that they need to help the family work. The family is the main resource for the children. And there ain't nobody, the happiness of the family is always limited by the least happy child in the family.
Very true. So there's another question floating around I thought was kind of interesting. That is, how to explain the severity of COVID, especially to kids, but without really just completely freaking them out, and making sure they know that they're not the ones that are sick, but people are getting sick. And I think that's something that parents are really struggling with. The kind of piggyback question, additional question to that that we received in the chat was, how do you explain to a preschooler why we are social distancing, why their family is social distancing, and the neighbors are not following those same guidelines?
Yeah, that one is a tough one. So with regards to the first part, it is, yes, that's the thing about anxiety, right? We're anxious that something really bad is going to happen. Usually that's the general fear, something bad is going to happen. And in fact, at this time, something bad is actually really happening, and it's causing us to change the way that we're living and thinking about our lives. So I think having a very reasonably calm conversation with really little kids where you're answering just the questions that they're asking and giving them just enough information to satisfy them. If they need more information, they'll ask for more information. That's going to be really helpful. But we also want to be mindful about what kind of conversations we as adults are having, what's on the TV, what are we saying to people around on the phone, because they're hearing all of that also. And if the TV is always talking about the deaths and the coronavirus, this and that, they're just thinking everybody around them is sick and everybody is dead. So you really have to be mindful of, the general environment that they are experiencing. With regards to other people not doing what you're doing, just having a really good conversation about how we're doing our part and being socially responsible, not necessarily throwing them under the bus, but explaining that, this is what we feel that we have to do to keep ourselves safe. And as restrictions lift, we'll be able to interact better with others. But, that's been the conversation in our house with our neighbors, probably being a little bit more relaxed than we are sometimes. And, it's a good conversation to have where you can say, this is what we need to do to help keep our family safe. And if everybody kind of does the best that they can do, we'll come out of this thing a little bit better.
Maybe one brief comment. My favorite question to ask any age kid really is when they start to, as David said, anxiety is a future-oriented event. No, you're feeling it in the present, but it's about the future and a catastrophic future usually. So when kids worry about, am I going to get it? I mean, Dahra's right. We have the bad events happening now, but not necessarily to that particular child who's asking the question. My favorite question is it happening now? It's a mindfulness kind of technique. What is it happening now? And they'll say no. And then usually I'll say, so what is happening now? And what can you control now? And I think that's often very helpful.
I can add this one little part for little ones. This week I saw my wife's lesson to her 4 and 5-year-old youngsters in special education. She had her monkey puppet that appeared with a mask on,
Mm-hmm.
and all the kids went. And then she took the mask off and she said, "I'm still Beto." Oh, we have Beto here. And we're still Beto. And doing that and giving the youngster a chance to see that we are all still the same people, with a mask, without a mask, if we're distant, if we're not distant, and giving them a chance to try it on, to have an experience, and to find out that you can do these things without a sign that you're going to get sick and that people are going to die. And this is particularly true when you have a wife with a monkey. No, when you have issues in the family where someone has died recently, or people have gone to the hospital, where youngsters are sensitized, as Dahra was saying, because they're overhearing. It's in the best interest of survival for all young children to pay attention to what's going on in the adult world, in the upper atmosphere. They are indeed listening. You know that thing about little pitchers have big ears? Well, that turns out to be true, Mom.
Yeah. Yes, you brought the monkey out. I can't remember if I mentioned this, but if we can make things more tangible for children, the better it will be. So a glitter jar is really a helpful way to demonstrate two things. It is a great way to talk about the swirl that you're feeling when your emotions are swirling and kind of feeling out of control, and helping you calm down as you watch them settle. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but my kids and I made this glitter jar plastic water bottle yesterday, and we just dumped a bunch of glitter in here, and you can see the swirl. This sort of shows how you're feeling upset, but then as you watch it calm and you're taking those deep cleansing breaths that we talked about, it really helps calm kids down, and grown-ups too. This is just glitter and water, but if you put a little oil in it, it will emulsify, it will go a little bit slower, and you could put food coloring, and then it's really exciting, to create and to use, right?
Liz, I need a glitter jar.
I need the monkey.
So there was another question that somebody asked about just resources in terms of who's taking new patients. I can tell you that, I think especially during this time, in my own practice, doing the medication management piece, I've seen a lot more people with anxiety and depression, of course, because of this. And I think if you conceptualize anxiety and depression as something that can be triggered, like other mental health disorders, and I think that if you have a propensity towards anxiety for a lot of kids and adults, this whole thing has been very triggering. I'm seeing more and more people. So I can speak for myself and say that I am taking new patients and doing it, via Zoom call. I don't know if everyone else can kind of talk to that. And, if people do need, services.
Yeah, I think the Jewish Federation which is supporting Jewish Family Services, has made it clear that they have a hotline. I think Wendy talked about that initially, and that therapy services and even medication management are available through Jewish Family Services. Dahra and I work at the Hokessen Center for Change, and as of yesterday, I think we're all still working. Who knows about today? Dr. Mandelbaum, I know, is working, but I know that there are a lot of mental health practitioners in our community that have openings. It's been difficult for some people to want to do therapy online, and as a result, people have openings these days that maybe they didn't before all of this. So feel free to use your resources, use your neighbors during your Zoom talks to find out who they're seeing. They're seeing somebody. Use your family docs for resources with whom you can make a connection. I just think that this is a time where the more you take care of yourself, the more you take care of your family, and that's important.
I just wanted to add one other point. Even though some practices don't take health insurance, there are many practices that do, and most panels are allowing for telehealth and teletherapy. So your copays might be waived, or your premiums, your charges will be covered, even if you're doing it over a Zoom platform or something like that.
So I believe with Aetna and Blue Cross, they're waiving copays for telehealth right now.
Yeah, and I just heard today that they extended it through till the end of September. So that's really great.
So another question I was hoping we could talk about too is somebody had mentioned, that a lot of people are talking about this as a temporary issue, but on the other hand, maybe it'll go through the summer, maybe it goes into the fall, and how temporary really is that anyway? And kind of like how do you come to terms with that? Not an easy question.
Temporary in the greater scheme of one's life, this is temporary.
And
But I think we've become conditioned to think of temporary as something that might happen in a day or two or a week. That's not what's happening here. There's probably going to be a roller coaster event where things are going to open and close, where there's going to be outbreaks, there's going to be changes. Schools may open, schools may not open, and we know that traumatic disorders can sometimes originate after the trauma has completed its course. It doesn't mean it's completed its emotional course. So pay attention to it. If your co-pays are dropped, boy, you get a chance to hang out with people who are really interested in the content of what you're concerned with. And that's how we spend our lives. We lean in when everybody else goes, oh my gosh. So we're very friendly. Come see us.
Great. There was another question I think is sort of a pertinent way to close this. We have time for a couple more questions. But someone was saying, my husband and I are working more than ever, throughout the pandemic, and they're worried about neglecting their 10-year-old son and kind of using the internet as a babysitter. And I think a lot of people are having issues right now with just not being able to separate and working from home and trying to deal with children, and that's very, very difficult. And the question was, how do I get self-care for how do I take care of myself as well throughout this?
All right, that one is, I hear the heartstrings of that person that's asking that question, because nobody wants to think that they're putting their child at greater risk by doing just what they have to do to keep their family going.
Glitter jar.
The glitter jar can help. But
Everything.
this is a real challenge. I mean, I think that, some parents don't have the flexibility of kind of putting their work hours at different times of day than the school-based hours, and so yes, there might be times when you're less available for children, but you can counterbalance that. Like, if you think about it, they're at school, they're away from you. They're at Zoom school, they're away from you. When you have that family time, how are you spending it? How are you really engaging? Are you really capitalizing on that extra time that you have together? So you may not be, you're physically present, but you're not there available, and that might be okay for the school hours, especially if the child is older and can understand this is school time, this is work time. In terms of self-care, self-care is very different for lots of people, right? And there are some methods of self-care that are probably healthier than other methods of self-care, but certainly self-care can be like a family thing. You could, do some yoga together, or you could take a walk together. And if your self-care means I need time away from my children, which is okay, you could try and parcel that out with the other caretakers that are in the home with you. Maybe you need a half an hour reset, or you need to, wake up a little bit earlier, or like me, stay up a little bit later and just sleep. That's when I, get to watch my shows or whatever. So I think if we think creatively about the situation, we might be able to come to some solutions that will work. They might not be perfect, but it might work.
Thank you. I think you're cutting out again with the audio, unfortunately. I know. So the glitter jar was the answer. No, but I think what you were kind of getting at was, doing yoga and some self-care things, and that there's self-care that can be with the whole family, and also self-care where you kind of have to specify sometimes where, maybe you separate a little bit. And I know that in my practice, that's something I'm talking a lot with families about, is how to do that and how to kind of separate in the family, in the same home when you're, kind of all locked in together. Especially for the teens, because they're used to a lot more separation. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Okay, are we ready to wrap up? First of all, wow, that was an incredible and really meaningful hour that we got to spend together. I know that I'm going to be leaving the webinar with many, many insights and practical ideas to implement into my own life. And I hope that all of our participants will have gained some useful knowledge as well, and ideas to help us as we all navigate the next phase of our new normal. And no one really knows yet what that might look like. So just remember the glitter jar and a lot of the things we learned today from our panelists. Thank you all for your patience with our technical difficulties, but we finally got it. I'll tell you, right before I came on here today, I was on a webinar with JP Morgan and Walmart, and they needed to stop and restart the Zoom 3 times because of technical difficulties. So everyone just has to have a little flexibility and patience, and sometimes you just have to laugh and start over, and we appreciate everyone's flexibility with that. I'd like to thank each of our incredible professionals, Dr. David Sheslow, Dr. Dahra Williams, Dr. David Mandelbaum, and Paul Sheslow, who have so generously donated their time and wisdom today to speak to our community about these important issues and answer your questions. I'd also like to thank our beneficiary agency, Jewish Family Services of Delaware, for collaborating with Federation on this webinar. As a reminder, if you or anyone you know in the community is seeking help, you can contact JFS On Call, a free and confidential emotional support hotline at 302-644-5633. 781-4537, or you may also send a confidential email to Federation at jfdinfo@shalomdel.org. Links to the recording of this webinar, as well as Dr. Williams' slides and the resources that Dr. Sheslow mentioned, will be on our website shortly after this program, which is shalomdelaware.org. So for all those that are interested, we will have those resources available for you. I'm incredibly proud of the work that Federation is doing to keep our community connected and strong during this challenging time for everyone. And it was truly an honor to be able to spend this past hour with everyone. We thank you all so much for joining us. We grow stronger together. Stay well, stay healthy, and we hope to see you soon.